What if everything you built could vanish unless you pretended to love someone you've never met? The golden haze of sunset cast long shadows across Manhattan's skyline. From the 41st floor of the Sterling Heights building, one man stood on the edge of a decision that could cost him everything, or give him more than he ever imagined. The office was sleek, quiet, an empire of steel and glass perched above New York City. Dean Whitaker kept his hands in his pockets, his back to the shimmering skyline behind him. He faced three board members seated around the marble conference table, the air between them laced with quiet tension. "The Matsuda partnership is nearly sealed," noted Evelyn Cross, her manicured fingers tapping a slow rhythm on her crystal water glass. "But there's one recurring issue." Dean lifted an eyebrow. "Your personal life," interjected Walter Green, the most senior among them, or rather, the glaring absence of one. Dean's jaw tensed. "That has no bearing on my ability to lead Whitaker Holdings." "In most situations, I'd agree," Evelyn replied, leaning in, "but the Matsudas are deeply rooted in tradition, family, legacy. They've made it clear. They want to partner with someone who shares those values." Dean's voice was cool. "So what are you suggesting?" "They'll be here for the next 3 months," said the third board member, Lawrence Benton. "In that time, they need to see you as grounded, stable. You want me to parade around with a wife?" "Not necessarily a wife," Evelyn clarified, her tone more measured now. "But someone who fits the image. Someone who can be by your side at dinners, galas, investor meetings. Someone who makes you look committed." Dean turned away from them, his gaze falling on the sprawling city below. This deal would cement his company's reach across the Asian luxury real estate market. A decade of work, billions in future investment, all teetering on a single illusion. "You have 90 days, Evelyn added quietly. "That's when they make their decision." When the room emptied, Dean pulled at his tie, unbuttoned his collar, and poured himself a glass of scotch. The amber liquid caught the fading light as he stared into it, weighing the absurdity of the request against the sheer magnitude of what was at stake. His phone vibrated. "Lena, sister, dinner tonight? I'm worried about you." He sighed and typed back my place, 8 p.m. Across the river in Jersey City, in a cramped walk-up apartment, Charlotte Lottie Brooks sat cross-legged on her worn-out sofa, a dying laptop warming her knees. Her eyes flicked over the red notice blinking on the screen, another overdue utility bill. "Did you take your portfolio to that studio interview?" came a voice from the bedroom. It was her younger brother, Jamie. Lottie quickly minimized the bill and forced a smile into her voice. "Yeah, Jamie. They said they'll get back to me by Friday." She didn't mention the position had already been filled, or that it was her third rejection this month, or that Jamie's hospital invoice had just arrived, another $5,000 they didn't have. In the kitchen, she opened the fridge. Half a carton of milk, a couple of eggs, no leftovers. She'd skipped dinner again. Jamie needed the nutrients more than she did. The front door creaked open. Their mother stepped in, face drawn and eyes dull from the late shift. "What if everything you built could vanish, unless you pretended to love someone you've never met?" The golden haze of sunset cast long shadows across Manhattan's skyline. From the 41st floor of the Sterling Heights building, one man stood on the edge of a decision that could cost him everything, or give him more than he ever imagined. After a grueling double shift at the county hospital, Marie Brooks set her worn leather purse down on the counter, rubbing her temples. "Any updates?" she asked, her voice tired but hopeful. Lottie offered a small smile, shaking her head. "Not yet. But something will come through." She said it every time, even when the weight of reality threatened to crush her spirit, even when hope felt like a luxury they could no longer afford. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Hello? Lottie, it's Lena Whitaker. Despite her exhaustion, Lottie's face lit up. Lena had been her college roommate back before Lottie had dropped out to care for Jamie. Their lives had drifted in very different directions, but the friendship had somehow endured. Lena, it's been forever. I know, I'm the worst. But listen, are you free for coffee tomorrow? There's something I want to talk to you about. It's a little unconventional, but it might help with everything. Lottie's eyes flicked to the pile of bills, the half-empty fridge, the nearly depleted bottle of Jamie's medication. Honestly, crazy sounds like exactly what I need right now. Riverside Cafe, noon, and Lottie, wear something nice. After hanging up, Lottie stared at the phone, a furrow of confusion in her brow. She had no idea what Lena was talking about. What she didn't know was that across the city, Lena was already making another call, one that would shift the course of two lives. Dean, Lena said, watching crowds hustle past her office window. I think I've found your solution, and hers. The lunch crowd buzzed inside the Riverside Cafe as Lottie stepped in, adjusting the sleeves of her only semi-professional outfit, a worn navy blazer over a white blouse and dark jeans, the best she had. In the far corner, Lena waved, effortlessly elegant in a pale silk dress. Beside her sat a man whose presence seemed to quiet the room around him. Lottie recognized him instantly. Dean Whitaker. She'd seen his face on business covers and in news segments. In person, he was taller than expected, sharper somehow. His gaze focused, unreadable. Lottie, Lena stood, wrapping her in a warm hug. You look beautiful. Thanks for the polite lie, Lottie chuckled softly. This is literally what I wore to your graduation. Dean didn't smile. He stood and extended his hand. Charlotte Brooks, he said. It wasn't a question. Just Lottie, she corrected, shaking his hand. His grip was firm. All business. Please. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked, beside his tailored charcoal gray suit, one sleeve of which probably cost more than her rent. I'll get straight to it, Dean said once their drinks arrived. I need a wife, Lottie blinked. I'm sorry, what? A temporary wife, he clarified. For 90 days. It's for a business arrangement, Lena jumped in quickly. Dean needs to appear settled. For cultural reasons, for optics, it's all for show. Lottie waited for the punchline. When none came, she gave a shaky laugh. And you thought of me because you need money, Dean said, his voice cool and direct, and I'm offering a generous payment in return for discretion and dedication. Her amusement vanished. Lottie turned to Lena, hurt flickering in her eyes. Lena looked guilty. I told him about Jamie's condition, Lena admitted quietly, and everything you've been dealing with. You had no right. Lottie's voice tightened. No, she didn't, Dean said, cutting in, but I'm glad she did. I need someone intelligent, reliable, and believable. Lena believes that's you. Their food arrived, but Lottie had already lost her appetite. So, let me get this straight, she said, her voice steadying. You want me to pretend to be your devoted wife? For 3 months? Yes. In exchange for 500,000. The number settled between them like a thunderclap. Lottie's mind reeled. Jamie's treatments, their mother's fatigue, the unpaid rent, the gnawing fear of being swallowed whole by life. She looked Dean in the eyes. What exactly would this arrangement require of me? What exactly does this arrangement involve? Lottie asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dean folded his hands, calm and composed. You would move into my penthouse, attend events with me, be seen in public, appear to be in a committed relationship. Behind closed doors, we live separate lives. I have no intention of complicating this with entanglements. Lottie raised an eyebrow. Entanglements? Emotional or physical involvement? He clarified, his expression unreadable. This is strictly business. I see. She pushed her salad around the plate. And what's my story? How does a billionaire CEO fall for a broke designer from Jersey City? Something flickered behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe? You're Lena's former roommate. We met at one of her gallery events 6 months ago. We've been dating quietly since. Recently, we decided to get married. It's simple. Clean. Lottie nodded slowly. And after the 90 days? We divorce. Quietly. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You keep the money. You return to your life. She leaned back, studying him. Why me? Surely there are professionals, actresses, models even. I don't know, escorts, who do this sort of thing. I considered that, Dean admitted. But the Matsudas are observant. They'd see through a performance. You, on the other hand, have genuine ties to my life through Lena. And you have a real reason to make this work. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mom. Jamie's fever is back. Doctor wants to see him ASAP. Can you come home? Her stomach twisted. I need to go, she said, standing quickly. My brother's not well. Dean didn't hesitate. Take my car. It's faster than waiting for a ride. He motioned toward the sleek black Bentley parked outside. Lottie hesitated, then grabbed her bag. I haven't said yes. I know, but the offer stands. He handed her a small black card. That's my private number. Call me when you're ready. 3 days later, Lottie sat in the hospital waiting room, staring at that same card. Jamie had been admitted with a serious infection, complications from his autoimmune disorder. The doctors had a new treatment plan, but the insurance had refused it. $60,000. To Lottie, it might as well have been $6 million. Her mother sat beside her, dozing upright, the lines of exhaustion etched deep into her face. Another double shift, another night without rest. Lottie stood and walked into the hallway, her hands shaking. Dean picked up on the second ring. Charlotte? It's Lottie, she corrected automatically. I'll do it, but I have conditions. There was a pause. Go on. I need an advance. 60,000. My brother's treatment depends on it. And I need to be able to visit my family. Often. Done? Also, she took a breath. I won't sleep with you. That was never part of the agreement, he said, his voice cool but not unkind. And I never implied otherwise. Good. Then, I want everything in writing. A contract that protects both of us. My attorneys are already drafting it, he replied. I'll have them include your terms. When can you move in? Lottie glanced toward the room where her mother sat, worry carved into her every feature. 3 days. I need time to settle things here. Fine. I'll send a car on Friday. Noon. He paused, then added, and Lottie, the money for your brother's treatment will be transferred within the hour. True to his word, her phone buzzed an hour later with a bank notification. $60,000. Just like that, the crisis was averted. But as she watched the nurses begin Jamie's new treatment, a strange heaviness settled in her chest. She was about to sign her life into a contract with a man who viewed marriage as a strategic maneuver, a man who could erase a financial catastrophe with a single phone call, a man who would be her husband in name only. What Lottie couldn't possibly know was that Dean Whitaker had secrets of his own, and that this carefully drawn line between business and emotion would soon begin to blur. What was supposed to be a clean, structured arrangement was already beginning to twist into something more tangled than either of them expected. The courthouse was a monument of steel and glass, cold, efficient, and entirely impersonal. In other words, perfect for a marriage that meant nothing more than signatures on a dotted line. Lottie wore a simple white dress she'd found on clearance. It fit her like a second thought, which was fitting. Dean arrived in one of his usual charcoal suits, the only nod to the occasion being a single white rose pinned neatly to his lapel. You didn't have to do that, Lottie said, nodding toward the flower. Appearances, Dean replied, his tone clipped. Lena stood beside them, serving as their sole witness. Her smile was tight, eyes betraying a quiet sadness as she watched her best friend marry her brother, not for love, but for leverage. The ceremony took exactly 7 minutes. No music, no vows beyond what the law required. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, an awkward pause hung between them. Lottie felt the expectation in the air. A kiss. But Dean simply reached for her hand and gave it a brief, firm squeeze. For the judge's benefit, nothing more. Congratulations, the judge offered, clearly puzzled by the hollow exchange. Outside, Dean checked his watch. I have a meeting in 30 minutes. The movers should have delivered your belongings to the penthouse by now. Lena will take you there. That's it? Lottie asked, eyebrows raised. We just got married and you're off to a meeting? Something that might have been amusement tugged briefly at the corner of his mouth. Would you prefer a reception? No, She stopped herself. Never mind. Go. Dean gave a brief nod to his sister, then walked toward his waiting black car without looking back. He's not always like this, Lena said gently, watching him disappear down the steps. Well, no, he is, but there's more to him than you see. I don't need to see more, Lottie replied. This is a contract, not a relationship. The elevator to Dean's penthouse required a fingerprint and a key code. Lena helped program both for Lottie. When the doors opened directly into the apartment, Lottie stood frozen. The space was massive, walls of glass, polished stone floors, and minimalist decor in shades of charcoal, white, and silver. It looked more like a magazine spread than a home. This is where I'm supposed to live for 3 months, she whispered. The master suite is that way, Lena said, pointing down the hall. But Dean had the guest room set up for you. He thought you'd be more comfortable with your own space. Lottie nodded, strangely relieved. Your things should already be in there. The staff usually unpacks everything. The staff? She echoed. There's Mrs. Winters. She oversees the household. A chef comes in 3 times a week, and there's a cleaning service on Tuesdays and Fridays. Lottie let out a nervous laugh. Of course there is. After Lena left, Lottie wandered the penthouse, slowly taking it all in. Her bedroom was larger than her entire old apartment. The bathroom had a shower the size of a walk-in closet, and a bathtub that looked like a private spa. Her belongings had been neatly placed, her few clothes hung in a walk-in closet that could have fit a small family, her books arranged on a low shelf, her laptop open and waiting on a sleek desk by the window. Her old sketchbooks and battered art supplies looked completely out of place in the pristine setting. A soft knock startled her. An older woman with silver hair and warm eyes stood in the doorway. Mrs. Brooks? She said with a gentle smile. Lottie stepped forward. Just Lottie, please. I'm Mrs. Winters. I manage the household. Nice to meet you, Lottie said. I prepared a light dinner in case you're hungry. Mr. Whitaker called to say he'll be home around 9. Thank you. But you really don't have to wait on me. I can handle myself. It's no trouble. It's my job. Mrs. Winters paused, then added softly, if I may say so. It's nice to have someone here again. It's nice, Mrs. Winters said softly before leaving for the night, to have someone else in this apartment. It gets rather quiet with just Mr. Whitaker. When she was gone, Lottie wandered into the sleek, polished kitchen where a plate had been left out for her. Perfectly cooked salmon, roasted potatoes, and asparagus, still warm. She ate standing up, gazing out at the endless grid of Manhattan lights, feeling like an imposter in a life that wasn't hers. At exactly 9:07 p.m., Dean walked in. Lottie was curled up on the oversized living room sofa, sketchbook in her lap, pencil dancing across the page as she captured the city skyline from memory. You're still awake, Dean said, loosening his tie. She closed her sketchbook and looked up. I wanted to talk about how this is going to work. Day to day, I mean. He walked to the bar and poured himself a drink. Would you like one? No, thanks. Dean took a seat in the armchair opposite her. The Matsudas arrive next week. Before that, we need to establish our public dynamic. Appearances, events. I've arranged for us to be seen together at several key places dinner, at Alinea tomorrow, the Symphony on Thursday, and the Northwestern Memorial Charity Gala on Saturday. Lottie perked up. Northwestern? My mom works there. I know, Dean replied. That's why I chose it. It lends credibility, our connection to a cause linked to your family. She blinked, surprised by his awareness, by the precision of his choices. Calculated or not, it felt thoughtful. What about during the day? She asked. I can't just sit around doing nothing. You're free to continue your freelance work, as long as it fits our arrangement. I've had the second bedroom set up as a home office for you. Lottie stared. You did? Lena mentioned you're a graphic designer. I assumed you'd need a workspace. Again, his consideration caught her off guard. Thank you, she said quietly. That's, unexpectedly kind. Dean shrugged. It's practical. You'll be more convincing as my wife if you're not miserable. Right, she said, standing. Practical. She turned toward the hallway. I should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow, pretending to be madly in love with you. A flicker of amusement passed through his expression. I'm told I grow on people. Like a fungus, she replied without thinking. To her surprise, Dean laughed, a short, genuine sound that softened his whole face. In that moment, he looked years younger, almost approachable. Good night, Lottie, he said, still faintly smiling. Good night, husband, she replied, testing the word on her tongue. Something shifted in his eyes. Brief, unreadable, before the cool mask of professionalism slid back into place. The next morning, Dean was already gone. A handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter. Back at 7 for dinner. Reservations at 8. Lottie spent the day familiarizing herself with the penthouse. Her new office was a dream, outfitted with a high-end computer, a digital drawing tablet, and software she never could have afforded. It felt surreal. At 6:30, she was finishing her makeup when her phone rang. It was Jamie. How's the palace? He teased, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Ridiculous, Lottie admitted, lowering her voice even though she was alone. The bathroom's bigger than our old apartment, and the billionaire husband? She paused. Cold, efficient, exactly what you'd expect. Mom still thinks you've completely lost your mind. Maybe I have. Jamie's voice turned serious. Lottie, are you sure about this? Living with a stranger, pretending to be married? I'm sure about getting you better, she said without hesitation. Everything else is just temporary. After they hung up, Lottie slipped into the only nice dress she owned, a deep green silk one that Lena had helped her choose for job interviews. Simple, but elegant. It made her feel like someone who belonged. When she stepped into the living room, Dean was already waiting. He turned, and for the first time, his composure faltered. His eyes widened slightly, just for a moment. Dean's gaze moved slowly, from Lottie's face to the curve of her dress and back again. You look, he began, then cleared his throat. That color suits you. Thanks, she said, suddenly aware of every inch of silk brushing her skin. Is it appropriate for Alinea? It's perfect. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But you should wear this. Inside, nestled in dark blue fabric, was a platinum wedding band paired with an engagement ring. A single diamond glittered, throwing prisms of light in every direction. Wow, Lottie whispered. Is this real? Dean looked mildly offended. Of course it's real. Did you think I'd hand my wife a fake diamond? I'm not actually your wife, she reminded him gently as she slid the rings onto her finger. They fit like they were made for her. How did you know my size? Lena, he said simply, slipping on his own platinum band. We should go. The car's waiting. In the elevator, they caught sight of themselves in the mirrored wall. Dean in a perfectly tailored suit, Lottie in her understated dress, both now wearing rings that symbolized a promise neither of them truly made. They looked the part, but the emotional distance between them couldn't have been clearer. Then Dean spoke, almost to the glass in front of him. My parents had a marriage of convenience. Lottie turned her head, surprised by the unexpected confession. My father needed my mother's family name, he continued, eyes following the descending floor numbers. She needed his money. They were never happy. Is that why you've never married? She asked quietly. He met her gaze in the reflection. It's one of many reasons. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened. He placed a light hand on the small of her back as they stepped into the lobby, making their first official appearance as husband and wife. His touch was warm through the silk, grounding in a way that startled her. For one fleeting moment, it felt real, and judging by the way his shoulders tensed slightly, maybe he'd felt it too. Dinner at Alinea passed in a blur of candlelight, flawless cuisine, and carefully curated conversation. To Lottie's surprise, Dean played the role of doting husband with effortless charm. He reached for her hand with practiced ease, found her eyes across the table with steady affection, leaned in when he laughed, even though none of it was real. By the time they returned to the penthouse, she felt exhausted from keeping the performance going. You did well tonight, Dean said as the elevator ascended. The couple next to us, were they anyone important? Thomas and Ingrid Patterson. He's on the board of Matsuda's U.S. operations. Lottie narrowed her eyes. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Dean's lips curled faintly. Very little in my life is. The next morning, Lottie found a meticulously organized schedule waiting in her inbox. A full itinerary for the week, complete with upcoming appearances, dinner reservations, and outfit suggestions. Over breakfast, surprisingly, Dean was home. She looked up from her phone. Do you plan every hour of your life this precisely? He didn't look up from his newspaper. Efficiency matters. So does spontaneity, she said, sipping her coffee. A flicker of amusement danced across his features. Is that your professional opinion, as my wife of 2 days? No, it's my opinion as someone who doesn't have color-coded bathroom breaks. To her surprise, he laughed again. That same unguarded sound she was starting to recognize. For a second, he looked soft. I'll take it under advisement, he said, turning back to the paper. As the week unfolded, they settled into a rhythm that was oddly comfortable. Most mornings, Dean was out early. On the rare days he stayed, they shared quiet breakfasts, like two strangers pretending they weren't. During the day, Lottie buried herself in freelance work, grateful for the upgraded tools that allowed her to take on bigger projects and charge more. Evenings were a different story. They were seen together. At charity events, in upscale restaurants, at art exhibits and book launches, Chicago's newest power couple. They posed for photos, answered questions with synchronized smiles, and left just the right impression everywhere they went. But behind closed doors, when the dresses came off and the suits were hung up, they returned to their separate lives, separate rooms, separate hearts. Until one afternoon, as Lottie wandered the penthouse alone, something shifted. It happened during a routine client call. Lottie was pacing the hallway outside her office when she noticed it. A single door, unlike the others, sealed with a lock. Sleek, silver, and out of place in a home where everything else was open and pristine. Curiosity piqued. She mentioned it later that day while chatting with Mrs. Winters. That's Mr. Whitaker's private room, the housekeeper said, her tone respectful but firm. No one goes in there, not even me. That night, as they sat in the living room, going over their event schedule, Lottie couldn't help herself. What's behind the locked door down the hall? Dean stiffened. Nothing important. It must be something, she said, trying to sound light, if it's the only locked door in the entire penthouse. It's private, he said, his tone clipped. Lottie raised her hands in surrender. Got it. Sorry I asked. The next day, Lottie came back early from a coffee meeting, the apartment quiet as ever, until she noticed it. A thin line of water trickling out from beneath the mysterious door. Her stomach dropped. Without hesitation, she called Dean. I need the key to your private room, she said as soon as he answered. There's water coming from under the door. There was a pause, then Dean cursed under his breath. Top drawer of my desk. Right side. She found it and rushed back. The moment the door clicked open, a wave of paint and linseed oil hit her senses. Inside, water from a burst pipe had sprayed across what was unmistakably an art studio. The room was flooded with natural light. Canvases lined the walls, landscapes, abstracts, portraits in varying stages of completion. An easel stood in the center, a large painting half covered by a cloth. Lottie shut off the valve under the sink and grabbed every towel she could find. Most of the artwork had been spared, but a few drops had splashed onto the canvas at the center. As she gently dabbed at it, the edge of the cloth slipped. Her breath caught. It was a portrait of a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. Familiar. She'd seen that face before, framed on the walls of Lena's apartment, Dean's mother. But this painting, it wasn't just realistic. It was intimate, personal. It radiated affection. What are you doing? Lottie spun around. Dean stood in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes dark. I was trying to save your paintings, she said quickly. The pipe, it burst. I didn't know. His eyes fell to the uncovered portrait, then back to her. You should have waited. Let me handle it. So everything could get ruined? She shot back, motioning to the soaked floor. I was helping. Dean stepped into the room, eyes scanning the damage. He moved toward the portrait, his fingers hovering just above the canvas without touching it. Is it okay? Lottie asked softly. He exhaled. Yes. You did the right thing. The words seemed to cost him. I didn't know you painted. Few people do. His voice had tightened again. It's not something I share. You should. These are beautiful. He looked at her, surprised. They're amateur at best. They're honest, she countered. Especially that one. Her eyes returned to the portrait. Your mother? He nodded once. She passed when I was 16. I'm sorry, she said quietly. My dad died when I was 19. It changes you. Something in Dean's face softened, an unspoken recognition passing between them. Yes, he said quietly. It does. They stood in silence, surrounded by the scent of paint and the sound of water dripping softly into soaked towels. It was the first real moment they'd shared that hadn't been scripted. The hospital charity gala loomed on the calendar, an event Lottie had been quietly dreading. Not just because her mother would be there, but because it would be her first real appearance as Mrs. Whitaker. I have nothing to wear, she told Lena over a whispered phone call. My one good dress isn't gala material. Check your closet again, Lena replied, her tone suspiciously cheerful. Later that evening, Lottie noticed a garment bag hanging where there hadn't been one before. Inside was a midnight blue gown, shimmering with delicate beading. Matching heels and a sleek clutch completed the look. Pinned to the hanger was a small note. For appearances, the dress fit like it had been made for her, hugging curves she usually hid, flowing in a way that made her feel radiant. When she stepped into the living room, Dean was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her. At the soft click of her heels, he turned. He went utterly still. For a long moment, He just looked at her. No clever comments, no polite praise, just silence and something unreadable in his expression. Then at last he cleared his throat. "It's beautiful," Lottie said, smoothing a hand over the shimmering fabric of her dress. "It's suitable," Dean replied, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. Lingered in a way that felt anything but practical. The hospital gala was everything Lottie had feared, opulent, overwhelming, and filled with eyes that didn't blink. Whispers trailed them, like perfume. Everyone seemed desperate to meet the woman who had tamed Manhattan's most elusive bachelor. Dean remained close, one hand steady on the small of her back, guiding her through introductions and conversations like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Just breathe," he murmured when he sensed her unease. "You're doing fine." But when Lottie spotted her mother across the room, tension gripped her again. "My mom's here," she said quietly. Dean didn't miss a beat. "We should say hello. She's my mother-in-law after all." The introduction was awkward, brief, but surprisingly smooth. Dean complimented Marie Brooks on her work as a nurse and mentioned, without fanfare, that he'd made a significant donation to the pediatric unit where she worked. By the end of the conversation, even her skeptical mother had softened. "He's not what I expected," Marie admitted once Dean had stepped away to get drinks. "He's full of surprises," Lottie replied, surprised to find herself meaning it. Later, as they danced beneath the golden chandeliers, Lottie found herself leaning into Dean's embrace more easily than she'd imagined. He led her across the floor with quiet confidence, every movement precise but never stiff. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Boarding school," he replied. "Mandatory lessons. Just one of many useless things they drilled into us." Lottie laughed. "I learned from YouTube, before my cousin's wedding." Dean's lips twitched at the corners. "You're full of surprises, Lottie Brooks." "Stephen," she corrected playfully. "Lottie Whitaker. Remember?" Something flickered behind his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, drawing her closer. "How could I forget?" he murmured. As the evening wore on, Lottie noticed a woman across the ballroom, watching them intently. Tall, striking, with calculated elegance and sharp, assessing eyes. "Who's that?" she asked. Dean followed her gaze. His body went taut. "Vanessa Hargrove," he said under his breath. "An ex. She wanted a lot of things. Money, mostly." The tension in his jaw deepened. "She's coming over." Before Lottie could brace herself, Vanessa swept up to them like a storm dressed in silk. "Dean, darling," she cooed, voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your bride?" The word bride left her lips like a joke. "Vanessa, this is my wife, Charlotte," Dean said, his tone chilled but polite. "Lottie, this is Vanessa, an old acquaintance." "How quaint," Vanessa said with a sharp smile, eyeing Lottie's dress. "I didn't realize you were into charity cases." Dean stiffened, about to speak, but Lottie beat him to it. She rested a hand gently against his chest, smiled sweetly, and said, "It's not charity when you're investing in something of value. But I wouldn't expect someone who only understands quick returns to see the difference." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. Dean has a short attention span for distractions." She turned and walked away, heels clicking like punctuation. Lottie realized her hand was still pressed against Dean's chest. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. When she looked up, Dean was watching her, intensely. The air between them shifted. "Let's get some air," he said, voice low. They stepped out onto a quiet balcony. The night air was crisp against Lottie's flushed skin. The city spread out before them, like a living painting, glittering and endless. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Dean cut in. What you said was perfect. She looked up at him, caught off guard by the warmth in his voice. Really? Really? His gaze searched her face. You continue to surprise me, Lottie. Is that a good thing? He hesitated. I'm not sure yet. They stood close, the muffled sounds of the gala fading behind them. Lottie was acutely aware of everything. His nearness, the soft scent of his cologne, the faint rise and fall of his breath. And for the first time, pretending didn't feel like pretending anymore. Dean's eyes kept flicking down to her lips. We should go back inside, Lottie whispered, but she didn't move. We should, he agreed, yet took a step closer. His hand rose, brushing her cheek, warm and steady. Lottie knew she should pull away. This wasn't part of the agreement. This wasn't written into any contract. But when Dean's lips met hers, gentle, searching, she responded without thinking. Her hands slid up to his shoulders. Grounding herself in the solid warmth of him, the kiss deepened. No longer tentative, but real. Unfiltered, undeniable. It was nothing like the poised affection they'd rehearsed for cameras. This was raw, unscripted, and dangerously intoxicating. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, silence bloomed between them, stunned, fragile, and full of questions neither dared speak aloud. The ride home was quiet. Tension crackled in the air like static. Lottie stared out the car window, her mind looping the kiss again and again. It had been her first real kiss in years, and by far the most affecting. Dean sat beside her, outwardly composed, except for the tightness in his jaw and the restless tapping of his fingers on his knee. As the car pulled up to their building, he finally broke the silence. We should talk about what happened. Lottie nodded, unable to trust her voice. Inside the penthouse, she kicked off her heels. Dean loosened his tie. The small, domestic gestures felt strangely intimate in the echo of everything that had just happened. Would you like a drink? He asked. Please. He poured them both a glass of whiskey. Lottie took a sip, letting the burn anchor her. Dean spoke first, his voice carefully neutral. About the kiss, it wasn't planned. That's one word for it, Lottie replied, her tone wry but soft. I apologize if I overstepped. She looked up at him. Did you mean it? The kiss? He hesitated. Rare for him. I'm not sure what I meant. That's not an answer. It's the truth. He set his glass down. This arrangement, it's becoming complicated. Lottie laughed gently. You think? A small smile touched his lips, then faded. We agreed to keep things professional. We did, she agreed quietly. But that was before. Before what? Before I knew you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The real you. Not just the CEO of Whitaker Holdings. Dean looked away, visibly unsettled by the depth in her words. You don't know me, Lottie. I know you paint portraits of your mother with reverence, she said. I know you're kind to Mrs. Winters when you think no one's watching. I know you made a huge donation to my mother's hospital wing, without telling me. She took another sip of whiskey, gaze steady. I'm starting to see past the facade, Dean. He was quiet for a long beat. And what do you see? I see someone who's been hurt. Someone who hides behind contracts and schedules because feelings are messy. Because control feels safer than vulnerability. His expression hardened. That's presumptuous. Am I wrong? Instead of answering, he asked, What about you? What are you hiding behind this arrangement? The question hit harder than she expected. Lottie stared into her glass, the liquid swirling like the thoughts in her head. Finally, she spoke. Security, she said, a chance to help my family without drowning in debt. But also, she drew a breath. Maybe I'm hiding from relationships too. Dean's eyes never left her. And what exactly would you need to hide from? Lottie shifted, setting down her drink. The conversation had grown too heavy to bear while standing. She moved to the sofa, tucked her legs beneath her. A moment later, Dean joined her, leaving a careful space between them. "I've never been good at relationships," she admitted. "Between taking care of Jamie and working 2 or 3 jobs at a time, I never had time for anything else. The few dates I went on, they didn't get it. They didn't understand why I couldn't just drop everything to go away for a weekend, why my family always came first." Dean's voice was low, but certain. "That's their failure, not yours. That's on them," Dean said quietly. Lottie looked up, surprised by his unwavering defense. "Maybe," she murmured, "but after a while, it just felt easier not to try." "You've never had a serious relationship?" he asked gently. She shook her head, tracing the pattern on the sofa with her finger, avoiding his gaze. "I've never really had much of any relationship, to be honest." Silence settled between them again. When Dean finally spoke, his voice was cautious. "Lottie, are you saying you're inexperienced?" She gave a small, almost amused laugh. "That's one way to put it." Dean's eyes searched hers. "How inexperienced?" She met his gaze directly. "Completely. I'm a virgin, Dean." His expression shifted, his brows lifting in surprise. Real surprise, more than she'd ever seen from him. "I see," he said after a beat. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. I'm just surprised. It's the 21st century and, well, who waits anymore?" "Right," she said, attempting to keep her voice light. Dean's eyes softened. "You're beautiful, intelligent, compassionate. I just assumed men would be lining up for your attention." The compliment, spoken so matter-of-factly, sent heat rushing to her cheeks. "Well, they weren't," she said, "and then life got complicated, and it just never happened." He was quiet for a long time. "Thank you," he said finally, "for telling me. I thought you should know," she shrugged. After the kiss, "It seemed relevant. It changes things," Dean admitted. "Why? We agreed this isn't a real relationship." Dean ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture that revealed just how uncertain he felt. "It changes things," he repeated, "because I want to kiss you again." And that wasn't supposed to happen. His honesty hung in the air between them, vulnerable and unguarded. "Oh," Lottie said softly. Dean's voice tightened. "Your first time shouldn't be with someone who's paying you to pretend to be his wife. You deserve better than that." She looked at him, quiet but firm. "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Dean stood abruptly. "It's late. We should get some rest." Lottie watched him retreat toward the hallway, confusion twisting in her chest. "Dean." He paused, his back to her, but didn't turn. "The kiss?" she said. "I don't regret it." His shoulders tensed, but he said nothing more. "Good night, Lottie," he said at last, and disappeared down the hall. The next morning, Lottie woke to an empty penthouse. A note on the kitchen counter informed her that Dean had early meetings and wouldn't be back until late. It was short, formal, distant, a sharp contrast to the honesty they'd shared the night before. She spent the day working on a new design project, doing her best to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to Dean, to what he'd said, and to what he hadn't. When her phone rang and Lena's name appeared, she picked up immediately, grateful for the distraction. "How's married life?" Lena asked. "Complicated," Lottie admitted. "Uh-oh? What happened?" Lottie hesitated. "We kissed. At the gala. Was it part of the act?" "No. It was real." There was a long pause. "And how do you feel about that?" "Confused? Nervous?" Lottie sighed. "I told him I've never been with anyone." "How did he take it?" "He said it changes things. That I deserve better than whatever this is." "That sounds like Dean," Lena said gently. "He has this protective streak. Always has." "I don't need his protection," Lottie said. "I need—" She trailed off, uncertain. "What do you need, Lottie?" "I don't know anymore," she whispered. After hanging up, Lottie tried to get back to work, but her thoughts refused to settle back. Eventually, they led her to Dean's studio. The door was unlocked now. Water damage from earlier had broken the lock. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of paint and turpentine. A new canvas stood on the easel. It was barely more than a sketch, rough and unfinished. But Lottie recognized the subject instantly. It was her, in the midnight blue gown, standing on the balcony, looking out over the city. The moment they'd kissed, her heart stuttered. Dean was painting her. She stepped back quietly, retreating from the room like it was sacred ground. That evening, when Dean returned home, Lottie was already in the living room, waiting. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her, eyes searching hers. Dean's expression was guarded as he stepped through the door. "We need to talk," Lottie said, standing in the center of the living room. "About?" "I saw the painting," she said. "The one you started. Of me." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have gone in there. The door wasn't locked," she replied. "Why are you painting me, Dean?" He set his briefcase down, slowly, like buying time with every movement. "I paint the things that affect me." "And I affect you?" she asked, stepping closer. Dean hesitated. "More than you should." Lottie studied him. "Last night, you walked away. I was trying to do the right thing." "For who?" "For you," he said, frustration edging into his voice. "This arrangement, it's temporary, Lottie. In 2 months, it ends. You take the money, I get my merger, and we go our separate ways. That was the deal. And if things change, they can't." His tone was firm, almost final. "I don't do relationships. Not real ones." "Because of your parents?" His jaw clenched. "Because relationships are distractions. They're messy, unpredictable, and almost always disappointing. So you'd rather live your entire life alone than risk getting hurt?" Lottie challenged. "I'd rather focus on what I can control." "Like your feelings for me?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Dean's composure cracked. Just for a moment. She saw it in his eyes, the flicker of something raw beneath the surface. "My feelings are irrelevant," he said at last. "We have a contract." "Contracts can be amended," Lottie said softly. Dean stepped closer, close enough that she could see the battle waging behind his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending there's nothing between us." "And then what?" His voice was low, intense. "We have a brief affair. You leave with a broken heart, and I go back to my life like none of this mattered? How is that fair to you? Why are you so sure I'd be the only one with a broken heart?" she asked. The question hit him hard. He turned away, walking to the windows, staring out at the skyline. "I can't offer you what you deserve, Lottie," he said quietly. "Your first time. It should be with someone who can give you more than 90 days. She stepped beside him. "Maybe I'm not asking for forever," she said. "Maybe I'm just asking for now." Dean looked down at her, torn between want and restraint. "You don't know what you're asking for." "I'm 27 years old, Dean," she said gently. "I think I know my own mind." "And your heart?" The question was soft, almost vulnerable. Lottie placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. She felt it beat faster beneath her palm. "My heart is my concern," she whispered, "not yours." Dean's hand came up and covered hers. "That's where you're wrong." Before she could say anything more, his phone rang. The distinct tone he'd set for all calls related to the Nakamura merger. He closed his eyes briefly, then stepped back. "I have to take this." Lottie nodded, letting her hand fall to her side. "We're not done talking about this," she said. He paused in the doorway to his office, then looked back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," he said, "we're not." After he disappeared behind the office door, Lottie remained by the windows, arms wrapped around herself. How had a fake marriage led to the most real feelings she'd ever experienced? And could Dean's carefully built world survive the growing connection between them? The Nakamura dinner was scheduled for Friday evening, a private, intimate gathering held at Dean's penthouse designed to showcase his version of domestic bliss. All week, she and Dean circled each other warily. The conversation about the painting, the kiss, and everything it stirred, left unfinished, simmering beneath every glance, every silence. Business consumed most of Dean's time, but Lottie threw herself into preparations for the dinner, determined to make it perfect, despite the tension between them. She worked closely with the chef to craft a menu blending American and Japanese flavors, arranged flowers throughout the space, and even learned a few polite Japanese phrases to greet their guests. "You didn't have to do all this," Dean had said earlier in the week, his voice softer than usual. But she had to, not just for appearances, but because something inside her had shifted, and maybe, just maybe, something had shifted in him too. "You didn't have to go to such lengths," Dean said softly, finding Lottie reviewing the place settings on Thursday evening. "I want to help you succeed," she replied simply. "That's why I'm here, isn't it?" Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment maybe, or doubt. "Yes," he said after a pause. "I suppose it is." On Friday morning, Lottie opened her bedroom door to find a small velvet box placed neatly on the floor. Inside was a delicate pearl necklace. Simple, elegant, and understated. A folded note lay atop it. "For tonight, thank you for your efforts." The gesture touched her more than it should have. As she fastened the necklace around her neck, admiring how it rested against her collarbone, her phone rang. It was Jamie's doctor. With news that made her heart leap, the latest test results were in. The new treatment was working better than expected. Elated, Lottie rushed down the hallway to share the news with Dean. She approached his office door, slightly ajar, and stopped when she heard his voice, low and tense. "This isn't the time, Vanessa." Lottie froze. "I understand your position," Dean continued, calm but clipped. "But my decision is final." A pause. "My marriage is not your concern." Another pause. "No. That's not possible." Lottie knew she should walk away, but her feet remained planted. "What we had is in the past," Dean said. "I've moved on." Longer silence. "I can't deny that," he added, voice softer now. "But it doesn't change anything." Her stomach dropped. What couldn't he deny? "That's fine. Monday at 2, my office." "Not here." His tone turned cold. "After that, we're done. For good." The last time? For what? Lottie stepped back from the door, her joy about Jamie's news evaporating. The pearl necklace around her neck now felt heavy, unearned. The Nakamura dinner began at 7 sharp. The penthouse shimmered with candlelight and soft instrumental music. Lottie played her part with grace, the picture-perfect wife, offering warmth where Dean brought strength. She spoke just enough, laughed at the right moments, and even presented the Nakamuras with a hand-illustrated thank you card written in careful Japanese. Mr. Nakamura smiled broadly as he read it. "Your wife is a treasure, Mr. Whitaker," he said as the evening wound down. "You are a fortunate man." Dean's hand slipped to Lottie's waist with practiced ease. "I know," he said, glancing at her. "She reminds me every day." When the guests had gone, Lottie headed straight for the kitchen and began gathering dishes, needing something, anything, to keep her hands busy. "Leave that for the staff," Dean said gently. "You were remarkable tonight." "Thank you," she replied, her voice cool, distant. Dean frowned. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said, stacking another plate. "Everything's fine." "Lottie, it's not." He stepped forward, taking the plates from her hands and setting them aside. "Talk to me." "I heard you," she said at last. "This morning. On the phone. With Vanessa." Dean's jaw tensed. You were eavesdropping? I was coming to tell you about Jamie's test results. Your door was open. Her eyes met his. Steady, unforgiving. You're meeting her on Monday. For business, Dean said immediately. Her father is a minority investor in one of my subsidiaries. It sounded personal to me, Lottie said, voice soft but pointed. You said you couldn't deny something after she brought up your feelings. Realization dawned in Dean's expression. That's not what happened. It doesn't matter, she said, stepping back. Our arrangement doesn't include explanations about your personal life. It does when you're making assumptions that affect this. Us. We don't have an us, Dean, Lottie said, the words stinging even as she said them. We have a contract. Dean's jaw clenched. Is that really what you think? After everything? I think I was foolish to forget what this really is. She reached up, unclasped the necklace, and set it gently on the counter. Thank you for the loan. It served its purpose. The moment felt final. Lottie turned to leave, but Dean reached for her arm. Lottie, wait. Let go, Dean. Not until you listen, he said, his voice tight, almost desperate. Vanessa called to try to restart something. She found out about our marriage and didn't believe it was real. Lottie gave a bitter smile. Smart woman. She said if I didn't still have feelings for her, I would have moved on years ago. His grip gentled. What I couldn't deny was that I haven't been in a real relationship since her. But I told her I've moved on. Because I have. Lottie wanted to believe him, but fear stood between them like a wall. It doesn't matter, she said, voice quiet. This isn't real, remember? Isn't it? Dean asked, his tone sharp with emotion. The contract may be artificial, but what's happening between us, it's not. Nothing is happening between us, Lottie replied, yanking her arm free. Nothing can happen. You made that very clear. Hurt flickered in Dean's expression before it vanished behind that carefully practiced mask. Fine, he said. If that's what you want to believe. It's what you established from the beginning, she reminded him, her voice rising. No emotional entanglements. Remember? Things change. Not for men like you, she snapped, sharper than she meant to be. You've spent your whole life avoiding real connection. Why would I be any different? Dean stepped back, as if her words had physically struck him. You're right, he said, voice turning cold. This was a mistake. The ice in his tone cut deeper than she expected. Her chest ached, but her pride held her firm. I'm glad we agree on something, she said, and turned away. She closed her bedroom door behind her, leaning against it as the tears threatened to spill. She'd been foolish. Foolish to believe any of it could ever become real. Foolish to think that Dean Whitaker could ever care for someone like her. The weekend passed in silence. Dean buried himself in work, barely present. Lottie spent time at her mother's house, helping with chores, checking on Jamie. His health was steadily improving, and that brought her comfort. As she dried dishes beside her mother Sunday afternoon, the quiet was broken. You've fallen for him, her mother said gently. Lottie nearly dropped the plate in her hand. What? No. Sweetheart, her mother said, smiling softly, I've known you your whole life. I see the way your eyes change when you talk about him. It's complicated, Lottie murmured. Love usually is, her mother said, handing her a towel, but it's worth fighting for when it's real. How do you know when it's real? Her mother's smile turned wistful, when the thought of walking away hurts more than the fear of staying. Monday morning, Lottie made her decision. She would end the contract early. The Nakamuras were clearly convinced. Dean could maintain the illusion on his own for the remaining weeks. Jamie's health was improving, and with the payment she'd already received, they could stay afloat until she found steady work. She began packing a small bag, slow and steady, breathing through the weight in her chest. That's when Dean returned. He paused in her doorway, eyes falling on the half-filled suitcase. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I think it's best if I leave, Lottie said, not looking at him. The Nakamuras are impressed. You don't need me anymore. That's not your decision to make, Dean said tightly. We have a contract. I'm willing to forfeit the remaining payment, she said, finally meeting his eyes. This isn't working, Dean. Because of Vanessa? He asked, stepping into the room. Nothing happened, he added quickly. Nothing will happen. She's my past. It's not about her, Lottie said. It's about us, this situation. It's too confusing. What's confusing about it? Everything, she exclaimed, tossing a shirt into the suitcase. 1 minute we're pretending, the next I don't even know. Kissing on balconies, having real conversations. You painting me in secret? What am I supposed to think? Dean's voice dropped low. What do you want to think? I want clarity. Fine. He stepped closer, his expression intense. I'm attracted to you. I think about you constantly. I haven't picked up a brush in months, but now I can't stop. And every time I see you, he broke off, as if the words had burned his throat. Because you've awakened something in me I thought was long dead. Dean's voice was rough, his gaze burning into hers. Is that clear enough for you? Lottie stood frozen, stunned by the intensity of his words. I told myself it was just physical, he continued, pacing now like the walls were closing in, that once the contract ended, these feelings would disappear. But they're not. They're getting stronger, and it terrifies me. He turned to her, breathing hard. Because I don't do this, Lottie. I don't let people in. She stepped toward him, her voice a whisper. Because everyone leaves. His composure shattered. My mother died. My father rebuilt his life with another family, without me. Vanessa, she wanted the lifestyle, the access, not me. Each word cracked open something deeper. Everyone I've ever cared about has either left or betrayed me. The pain in his voice struck her heart like lightning. I'm not them, Lottie said softly. No, Dean whispered, eyes dark. You're worse, because you make me want again. Things I promised myself I'd never want. You make me hope, and hope is the most dangerous thing of all. Dean, you want to leave? Fine. His voice was hard now. The contract's void. You'll still receive the full payment, as agreed. I don't want your money. Lottie's voice rose with her anger. That's not why I'm here anymore. And you know it. Dean spun back toward her, eyes blazing. Then why are you here, Lottie? What do you want from me? I want you to be honest, she said, chest heaving. With me, and with yourself. About what? About your feelings, she challenged. About why you're so determined to push me away when it's obvious you don't want me to go. Dean looked away, jaw clenched. What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me. She closed the distance between them. Tell me what you want, Dean. Not what's logical or strategic. What do you want? The silence between them stretched, full of unspoken fears and possibilities. Then his voice, low and trembling, I want you. He swallowed hard. Not as a contract, not as a formality. I want you in my life, in my bed, in my future. I want things I have no right to want. The confession stole the air from the room. Why don't you have the right? Lottie whispered. Because I'm not good at this, Dean said, motioning between them. Feelings. Relationships. I will hurt you. Probably sooner than later. Maybe, Lottie admitted. Or maybe I'll hurt you. That's the risk we take, Dean's voice cracked. I can't lose you. He stared at her, like the words had surprised even him. I've never said that to anyone before. Lottie stepped closer, close enough to see the raw vulnerability in his eyes. Then stop pushing me away. And if it doesn't work, Dean whispered. If we try and fail, then we fail, Lottie said, her voice steady. But at least we'll know we were brave enough to try. Dean reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. I don't want you to leave. Then ask me to stay, she whispered, not as your contract wife, as me. The moment hung between them, taut and trembling. Every wall Dean had so carefully built over the years trembled under the weight of this truth, this woman. Finally he spoke, barely audible. "Stay, please." And with that single word, everything changed. The contract, the pretense, the carefully measured distance, all of it fell away, leaving behind only two people, vulnerable, scared, and completely open to something real. Despite Dean's plea, Lottie knew they both needed space to absorb the weight of what had just passed between them. Walls that had stood for years couldn't be torn down in a single night, and she needed time to be with her family, to think, to breathe. "I need to visit home for a few days," she told him the next morning. "Jamie has a follow-up appointment, and I promised I'd be there." Dean nodded, his face unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. "When will you be back?" The question was simple, but it carried more weight than anything either of them had said the night before. "Friday," Lottie said, when Dean asked when she'd return. "If that's okay?" Dean met her gaze. "This is your home too, Lottie, for as long as you want it to be." The word home lingered between them, no longer a placeholder in a contract, but a promise, a shift from temporary to something enduring. As Lottie packed a real suitcase this time, not an escape bag, Dean stood in the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Lottie, yes?" "We're not pretending anymore, are we?" There was a rare vulnerability in his voice. Lottie looked up, catching the flicker of fear beneath his calm exterior. "No," she said gently. "We're not." He gave a small nod, both relieved and terrified. "Safe travels," he whispered. The first day without her, Dean buried himself in work. Back-to-back meetings, endless calls, anything to avoid thinking too much or feeling too much. But that evening, when the penthouse grew quiet, the silence felt heavier than it ever had before. He found himself standing at the doorway to her room. It still smelled like her, something light and floral that reminded him of mornings in the kitchen, of her teasing him over how seriously he made his coffee, of her laughter cutting through the stillness. Sketches were still pinned to the corkboard. A half-read novel rested on the nightstand. A cardigan lay draped across the chair like she might come back at any moment. He sat on the edge of her bed, heart tight. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't have noticed the absence of sound in the apartment. Now, it felt wrong. His phone buzzed. A message from Lena. "How's it going with Lottie?" Dean stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly typed, "She's visiting her family. I asked her to stay when she comes back. Not for the contract. For me." Lena replied instantly. Finally. He stared at her next message for a long time, and she said, "Yes, but I don't know what happens next." Lena sent one last message. "You figure it out together, big brother." That's what relationships are. Relationships. The word that once filled him with dread now felt like a lifeline. On the second day, Dean wandered into his studio. The unfinished portrait of Lottie still stood on the easel. He stared at it for a long time, then picked up his brush. For hours he painted, losing himself in the curve of her smile, the exact shade of her eyes. He painted not just her features, but what he saw in her, the quiet strength behind her kindness, the warmth that filled a room without trying. When he finally stepped back, he was stunned. It wasn't just a painting, it was her. Not just how she looked, but how she made him feel. That night, he called her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concern laced in her voice. "Yes," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." It was such a simple thing, but it meant everything. "Oh," Lottie said softly, "I'm glad you did." They talked for nearly an hour about Jamie's appointment, about a freelance project she was working on, about nothing and everything. When they finally said goodnight, Dean leaned back in his chair and realized He hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. By the third day, there was no denying it. He missed her. He missed the way she left her sketchbooks everywhere, the way she rolled her eyes when he stuck to his rigid routines, her laugh, her presence. He found himself in his father's old study, a room he rarely entered. In the desk drawer, beneath old correspondence and dusty folders, was a small velvet box. Inside it, his mother's engagement ring, an emerald, framed by 2 diamonds, simple, elegant. She had left it to him with a note for when you find someone who makes your heart feel like home. Dean had always believed he'd never use it. Now, he wasn't so sure. That evening, he called Lena and asked if she'd meet him for dinner. "You're in love with her," she said the moment she saw him. Dean didn't deny it. He didn't need to. "You love her?" Lena said the moment she sat down across from Dean. He didn't deny it. "I don't know how to do this, Lena," he admitted. "How to be what she needs." "Maybe you already are," she replied gently. Lena reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Lottie doesn't want perfect, Dean. She just wants real." Dean let out a breath. "I've spent my entire adult life avoiding real. Then it's time to stop running," she smiled. "Tell her the truth. All of it." Friday arrived, and Dean found himself checking the clock every 10 minutes. Lottie had texted that she'd be back around 6. By 5:30, he was pacing the living room, running through every version of what he wanted to say. At exactly 6:03, the elevator doors opened, and there she was. She looked tired, but happy. Her smile widened when her eyes found his. "You're here," she said softly. "I half expected you to be buried in emails." "I cleared my schedule," Dean said, stepping forward. "I wanted to be home when you got back." The honesty in his voice made her pause. She set her bag down gently. "Thank you." A silence settled between them, weighted with everything they hadn't yet said. "How's Jamie?" Dean asked finally. "Better," her face lit up. "The doctor says the treatment's working faster than they expected. He might be in full remission by Christmas." Dean smiled. "That's incredible." "It is." She took a breath. "Dean, while I was gone, I did a lot of thinking. Me too," he said quietly, cutting in. "And there are things I need to tell you. Things I should have said weeks ago." She followed him to the sofa. They sat facing each other, close, but not yet touching. "My parents' marriage wasn't just convenient," Dean began. "It was toxic." His voice was steady but tight. "My father was cold. Everything was a transaction. Everything had to serve a purpose. My mother, she was artistic, emotional. She tried to make it work, but he crushed her little by little." Lottie sat still, listening. "When I was 16, she got sick. Cancer. My father had already moved on. He was living with his secretary before she even passed." His voice cracked ever so slightly. "I watched her fade away while he built a new life like she never existed. And I told myself I'd never be like him, that I'd never use people, never discard them when they stopped being useful." "You're not like him," Lottie said gently. "But I was," Dean countered. "At least at the beginning, with you." He looked down. "This whole arrangement started as a means to an end. I told myself that's all it was, that you were part of the deal. We both entered it willingly," Lottie reminded him. "I needed help as much as you needed a wife. But somewhere along the way," he said, meeting her eyes, it stopped being about the deal. You became real, and that terrified me." She said nothing, but her hand inched slightly closer to his on the cushion between them. "I've spent my whole adult life making sure I didn't need anyone, that no one could leave me because I never let them close enough in the first place. But now, I need you." Dean swallowed. "The penthouse felt wrong without you. It's not home anymore unless you're in it." Lottie's eyes glistened. "Let me finish," Dean added gently, voice trembling. "I'm not good at this. Opening up, being vulnerable. But I want to try, with you. He took her hand. Not because of a contract, not for appearances, but because you make me want to be better. You make me want things I never thought I could have. What kinds of things? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled softly, his thumb brushing over hers. Connection, trust, partnership, a real marriage, someday, if that's something you might want too. Tears filled her eyes. I never expected this, Lottie whispered. When I agreed to your contract, neither did I, Dean said. But here we are. Here we are, she echoed, squeezing his hand. I was so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of being hurt. Afraid I'd just be another line item in your life. A transaction. You could never be just business to me, Lottie, he said, his voice raw. Not anymore. Dean reached up, brushing away a tear that had slipped down Lottie's cheek. I don't know how to do this perfectly, he said, his voice low. I'll make mistakes. Probably more than a few, but I want to try. If you'll be patient with me. I don't need perfect, Lottie replied, echoing Lena's words without realizing it. I just need you, the real you, even the parts that are scared and uncertain. Dean pulled her closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Lottie Brooks, he whispered, and for the first time in my life. That doesn't terrify me. Tears shimmered in Lottie's eyes as she smiled. Good, because I'm pretty sure I'm already in love with you, Dean Whitaker. When their lips met, it wasn't like the urgent kiss on the balcony or the passionate moments sparked by tension and uncertainty. This kiss was soft, grounded, a promise of what could be, now that the pretending had finally ended. As they slowly pulled apart, Lottie let out a quiet laugh. So, what happens now? Do we tear up the contract? Actually, Dean said, his eyes filled with warmth. I was thinking we renegotiate the terms. Something more permanent. I'm listening, Lottie whispered, her heart full, knowing that what began as a facade had led them to the edge of something beautifully, undeniably real. The weeks that followed transformed everything. The penthouse felt lighter, lived in, alive. Gone were the silent evenings and rigid routines. In their place, spontaneous dinners, music in the mornings, books half read on the sofa, and laughter echoing through the hallways. Their relationship, no longer bound by obligation, blossomed naturally, effortlessly. One evening, Lottie was working late in her home office, finalizing illustrations for a children's book project. Dean appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea. You've been at it for hours, he said, setting one beside her. Take a break. She stretched, rolling her shoulders. Almost done. Just need to finish this last spread. Dean moved behind her, his hands gently kneading the tension from her shoulders. These are beautiful, he murmured, studying the screen. They were whimsical illustrations, an adventurous little rabbit dreaming of flying. Thanks. Lottie leaned back into his touch, sighing contentedly. It's a fun project, but I wish I had time to work on my own stories. The ones about the little girl with the magic paintbrush? He asked. Lottie turned, surprised. You remember that? You mentioned it once, weeks ago. I remember everything you tell me, Dean said softly. The casual sincerity of the words made her chest tighten in the best way. This was a side of him few people ever saw, attentive, gentle, quietly observant. I've been thinking, he continued, sitting on the edge of her desk. You should publish it. Maybe someday, she said with a soft laugh. When I actually finish the illustrations. Why not now? Because publishing doesn't just happen, Dean. You need connections, an agent, a publisher willing to take a chance on someone unknown. I might know a few people, he said casually. Of course you do, Lottie shook her head, amused. But I don't want special treatment because I'm, sleeping with a billionaire. Dean's expression grew serious. That's not what I'm offering. I'm not trying to gift you something, Lottie. I believe in your work. It deserves to be seen. You deserve to be seen. The next morning, Lottie walked into the kitchen and found a business card sitting next to her coffee mug. Eliza Montgomery, Senior Editor, Brightwood Children's Books. Dean appeared with his own cup of coffee. She's expecting your call, he said, just to review your portfolio. No promises, no pressure. Lottie blinked. Dean? She doesn't owe me anything, he assured her. Her publishing house isn't connected to any of my companies. If she likes your work, it's because you're talented, not because of me. Lottie stared at the card. Eliza Montgomery, Senior Editor, Brightwood Children's Books. Excitement fluttered in her chest, but anxiety wasn't far behind. What if she hates it? She asked. Dean leaned in and kissed her forehead. Then you try someone else, But she won't. To Lottie's astonishment, Eliza Montgomery didn't just like her portfolio. She loved it, especially the concept for Mia's magical paintbrush, the story Lottie had only ever shared in whispers. 2 weeks later, Lottie found herself signing her very first publishing contract. I can't believe this is happening, she said breathlessly, as she and Dean clinked glasses of champagne on the balcony. I've dreamed of this since I was a kid. You did this, Dean reminded her, his voice gentle, in the warm Manhattan evening. Your talent, your vision. But you made the connection, she countered. You believed in me enough to put your reputation on the line. I believe in you, he said, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world. More than I've ever believed in anyone. Seeing you succeed, it makes me happier than any business deal I've ever closed. Lottie studied him in the fading light, this complicated, brilliant man who had walked into her life as a transaction and somehow become her greatest source of joy. You've changed, she observed. Dean raised a brow. Have I? The Dean I met 2 months ago would never have said something so sentimental. He laughed. A genuine sound that reached his eyes. The Dean you met 2 months ago hadn't met you yet. Lottie set down her glass and stepped into his arms. I love you, she said. The words fell from her lips like they'd been waiting their whole life to be spoken. No hesitation, no fear. Dean went still, just for a beat. Then his arms tightened around her. For a second, she wondered if she'd said too much, too soon. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his eyes lit with raw emotion. I love you too, he whispered, his voice rough, more than I thought I was capable of. Their kiss was soft, unhurried, a quiet promise exchanged in the hush of twilight. When they pulled apart, Lottie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Move into the master bedroom, Dean said suddenly. Lottie looked up at him, startled. With you? No more separate rooms, he said. I've never been more sure of anything. I want to fall asleep next to you, wake up with you. Not just for now, but for as long as you'll have me. That night, as they lay tangled together in what was now their bed, Lottie marveled at how completely her life had changed. From financial desperation to creative success. From loneliness to love. All because she had once agreed to a contract marriage with a man she never expected to care for. Do you believe love can bloom in the most unexpected places? Subscribe to Soul Lux Stories for more heartwarming tales of unexpected love. But even as their relationship deepened, a single truth hovered at the edge of every quiet moment. The contract was still set to expire. The Nakamura merger had progressed beautifully, and the final papers would be signed in just 2 weeks.
One night, while reviewing the last illustrations for her book, Lottie glanced up from her tablet. What happens when the contract ends? She asked quietly. Dean looked over, confused. What do you mean? Legally, she said, our marriage was only supposed to last 90 days. Then we divorce. I keep the money. You get your merger. Dean sat up straighter, his expression serious. Is that what you want? He asked carefully. Of course not, Lottie said quickly.
But the Nakamuras will be returning to Japan after the signing, Dean interrupted. What happens to our marriage after that? That's our decision, not theirs. So we just stay married? She asked, a tentative smile playing on her lips. Unless you're in a hurry to divorce me, he said, feigning offense. Lottie laughed, but the tears gathering in her eyes said more than words ever could. Lottie could see the flicker of uncertainty in Dean's eyes. That's not what I meant, she said gently. We got married for business reasons. Maybe we should, I don't know, start over. Do things properly. Dean set aside the pages of her book illustrations, his expression shifting into something more serious. Are you saying, he asked, you want a real proposal? A real wedding? Maybe, Lottie admitted, cheeks warming. It sounds silly when you say it out loud. Dean shook his head and took her hand. It's not silly. You deserve everything. The proposal, the wedding, the whole fairy tale, if that's what you want. I don't need a fairy tale, she said softly. I just want something that's ours, something not tied to contracts or business. Dean lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with quiet reverence. Then that's what you'll have, he said. Just not yet. She narrowed her eyes playfully. Not yet? A mysterious smile curved his lips. Some things are worth waiting for. As Lottie returned to her work, a blush still tingling in her cheeks, she couldn't help but wonder what Dean was planning, and whether their once unlikely beginning might truly become the love story she'd never dared to dream. The Nakamura merger was finalized on a crisp November morning, exactly 90 days after Dean and Lottie's courthouse wedding. The signing ceremony was followed by a grand reception held in a glass-walled event space overlooking the East River. Lottie stood beside Dean, not as part of a charade, but as the woman who truly loved him, as his partner. Congratulations, Mr. Nakamura said, bowing slightly. Your vision and persistence made this partnership possible. Thank you, Dean replied, his arm resting gently around Lottie's waist. But I've learned the best partnerships are built on more than just business. Mr. Nakamura smiled knowingly. Indeed, the greatest success means little without someone to share it with. As the celebration drew to a close, Dean leaned close and whispered in Lottie's ear, Are you free tomorrow night? She laughed. You do manage my calendar, remember? Perfect. I'm taking you somewhere special, he said, dressed casually. Should I be intrigued or worried? She teased. His eyes sparkled with mischief. Definitely intrigued. The next evening, Dean's driver took them to a familiar neighborhood, one Lottie hadn't visited in a long time. Her pulse quickened when the car pulled up in front of a small retro diner with glowing neon signage. Millie's? She said, turning to him in surprise. You told me you worked here in high school, Dean said. Said the tips helped you buy your first art supplies. Lottie blinked. I spent 4 years here, serving burgers and milkshakes and dreaming about anything else. Inside, the diner looked exactly as she remembered it. Vinyl booths, chrome countertops, the scent of coffee, and onions lingering in the air. What she didn't expect was to see her family waiting in a large booth near the back. Jamie, her mom, even Lana. What's going on? She asked, heart racing. Just dinner, Dean said innocently, with family. The meal was full of laughter and teasing, especially at Lottie's expense. Her mother and Jamie took turns telling stories from her teenage years. Burnt milkshakes, disastrous dates, impromptu doodles on order pads. Dean soaked up every detail like it was gold. When dessert came, Millie's signature apple pie, Dean excused himself for a moment. Lottie didn't think anything of it until the lights dimmed, and soft music started playing over the speakers. Dean reappeared, but instead of sitting down, he walked over and took her hand, guiding her to stand. The diner hushed. "Lottie Brooks," he began, his voice carrying softly through the room. "90 days ago, I asked you to marry me for all the wrong reasons." She stared at him, her heart hammering. It was a business deal, a transaction. Nothing more, or so I thought. His voice grew tender. "What I didn't expect was you." "It's not about deals and mergers," Dean said softly, his voice steady as his eyes held hers. "It's about connection, compassion, courage. All things you taught me, just by being yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This one different from the one that had once held their contract wedding rings. Gasps echoed through the cozy diner as he slowly sank to one knee. "Our first marriage was built on convenience," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring framed with delicate diamonds. "But I'm asking for our second to be built on love. Lottie Brooks," he continued, voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears filled Lottie's eyes the moment she saw the ring. "Is that—" she whispered. Dean nodded. "It was my mother's. She left it for the one who made my heart feel like home." He looked up at her, his voice breaking just slightly. "That's you, Lottie. It's always been you." "Yes," she said, the word barely audible. Then stronger. "Yes." As Dean slipped the emerald ring onto her finger, replacing the showy diamond that had once symbolized a contract, the entire diner erupted in applause. He rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a gentleness that spoke of promises made and futures chosen. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "No contracts, no conditions, just us." Their second wedding, held 3 months later in the botanical garden where Lottie's father had once proposed to her mother, was everything the first had not been: warm, joyful, honest, surrounded by the people who truly knew and loved them. Dean's vows, spoken with more emotion than anyone had ever seen from him, brought tears to every eye, including Lena's. "You found me when I wasn't even looking," he said. "You saw me when I was hiding, and you loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life earning that love." 1 year later, the nursery walls were covered in colorful murals, scenes from Mia's magical paintbrush, Lottie's now best-selling children's book. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching as Dean tried, unsuccessfully, to assemble the crib. "This piece goes here," he muttered, frowning at the instructions. Lottie grinned. "The Billionaire CEO, defeated by baby furniture. Should I call your board of directors?" Dean looked up, grinning. "They wouldn't believe it. According to them, I've gone soft since I got married. Have you?" she asked, joining him on the floor. Dean set the instructions aside and placed his hand gently over hers on her stomach. "Completely," he said, "and I couldn't be happier about it." Just then the baby kicked. They both laughed. "She's strong," Dean said proudly, "like her mom. And stubborn," Lottie added, "like her dad." Dean pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her growing belly. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" he asked. "When you agreed to my 90-day contract?" "Never," she said, eyes misting. "But I wouldn't change a thing. Not even the part where I was a cold, emotionally unavailable workaholic." Lottie pretended to think. "Well, maybe that part could have been shorter." Dean laughed, the sound lighter, freer than it had ever been. "I love you, Mrs. Whitaker. And I love you, Mr. Whitaker." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "The contract expired," she murmured, "but we're just getting started." As the afternoon sun poured through the nursery window, casting a warm golden glow across the room they had created for their daughter, Lottie felt the fullness of everything they had built. A marriage born from convenience had become the love story she never dared to hope for, one that would carry on, day by day, moment by moment, long after their original 90 days had passed. And maybe that's what real love is, she thought. Not perfect, not planned, just true,